Hello, you are about to listen to another awesome episode of the If I Had One Wish podcast. It's such a pleasure to bring you these meaningful conversations from friends and allies across the Wish network. If you aren't part of the network already, do you know you can join? Either as an individual or a corporate member, you'll get access to all the wonderful things we offer here at Wish and play your part in championing women in our sector. Follow the link in the show notes to find out more, but for now, enjoy the conversation. Well, hello and welcome to the If I Had One Wish podcast, where we bring you honest conversations with the women shaping the social housing sector. I'm your host, Crystal Hicks, the proud president of Women in Social Housing. So as you might know, as part of my presidential campaign called See Her, I'm asking organisations across the sector to look again, to really see the women who live in our homes, work in our organisations and lead in our sector, and more importantly, to design with them in mind. Today, I'm beyond excited to be joined by someone who is truly walking the walk when it comes to putting a gender-lensed approach on housing. Tracy Downie, the Chief Executive Officer of Women's Pioneer Housing. Tracy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Crystal. I'm really pleased to be here, and I've been following and listening about your See Here campaign very closely, and it is very much around what we do at Women's Pioneer Housing, so I'm really pleased to be here.
Brilliant to have you, Tracy. I'm really excited to about getting into our discussion today. So for our listeners who might not be familiar with Women's Pioneer Housing, could you tell us a little bit about your history and your mission?
I certainly can. So Women's Pioneer Housing was founded in the 1920s. So in 1920, and it was founded by a group of suffragettes, both women and a man. And this was very much at the time when we'd just come out of the First World War. Women had started to be doing more professional jobs, more jobs that had been previously only done by men. And they wanted something different. It was not, let's go back to live at home with our uncles, our fathers, our brothers, our partners. It was actually, we want to be professional. We want to be independent. And at the time, most single women were only able to live in a room in sort of like a boarding house or something, not in very nice places in whatever city you were in, or they were having to live with a male relative. Group of people who were doing good jobs, they were designers and architects themselves, said this isn't good enough. Women should now be able to live independently. And at the time they were privately financed, so they were able to get funding from friends and other professionals to redesign a large home in West London and make it into small bedsits so that a woman could finally have a key to their own front door. They weren't restricted by somebody that checked who they were bringing in. They had their own front door. So that's how Women's Pioneer started. And over the last 100 years, so it's 1920, so we're now 2025, so 105 years in almost, we're still doing very similar work in terms of giving a single woman a safe space to live, making sure and understanding where women want to live, making sure they feel safe, making sure they're near good transport links in areas that are considered safe. So most of our homes will be in good areas across West London. It's what we're going to continue doing for the next 100 years. And we're enjoying it. And there's still that need for a single woman to have a safe space to live in at affordable cost as well.
Yeah, amazing. So Tracy, I've got a history degree, right? And one thing that really really hit me whilst I was sort of doing my studying for my degree was that we take so many things for granted. When I was doing it, it was like, the early 2000s. But, we just think, things have been this way for such a long time, when actually 100 years isn't that long. And to think that, women couldn't have their own home only 100 years ago. I think one thing that's really struck me recently is we mustn't take housing for granted in terms of where we are now. Yeah, so it's really interesting to hear that the journey that you've been on. And so my campaign, right? It's about seeing her. It's about putting that gender lensed approach on everything to do with how we design our homes, how we design our policies. Really like that leadership piece around that. I'm really interested to hear from you, considering, women's pioneer housing is really focused on that. Just like how have you approached grappling with that?
Well, I think it's so wide, and I think you're right. We do underestimate the difference and how our lives are formed, not by what we need as women, but just the person who's developed and designed something. So for us, there's quite a number of things. So first of all, I've got to say we're so proud that we've been able to um, develop 102 homes that will all be social rent. I mean, at this point in time, yeah. At this point in time, it's so unusual for housing associations to still be developing social rented and only social rented, and for us, as small as we are, to be able to provide 102 is great. So that's our first one, because we know that a woman's working life is often disrupted by caring obligations, maybe, pregnancies and so on. Women are more likely to be in part-time work, in some 0 hours contracts and so on, and low paid key working is, are often going to be women. Our child carers and so on are going to be and more likely to be women. For us to be able to actually build social rented homes for single women is great. So that's our first one. Trying to make sure that our rents are really are affordable, and being able to do that with a new development's great. The other thing for us is around safety and making sure that where we build and where we develop has good transport links and is in a really safe area. I think I mentioned that before, but that's where we started from, the low cost and the safety. And I think as we've developed, there's more things that we've done. As we've talked about, maybe looking at policies and how we manage our policies and so on, to make sure that we recognise the needs of a woman. A single woman will be different. So, not just the design of the buildings that we've got and making sure they're light and responding very quickly, but making sure, for example, when a woman walks into that home, and if she does go into a relationship, that home will remain hers. So it's not going to be a case of, in our policies, it's a woman that holds the tenancy. It's not joint tenancy. It's going to be the single woman that holds the policy. Looking at things around responding and working with our local community police to understand and recognise when a property we might have may be targeted by someone, and what that might mean for the individual women in there. It may be more impactful if their safety is so important to them. The way we will build our doors and our buildings, and our windows, and just this safety aspect about that. And interestingly enough, when we were doing development, I did speak to one of the architects, and it was just off the cuff. We were just having a general conversation, and I was saying things like, as a woman, when you've got a lovely kitchen, you've got your window at the back of your work surface, and the window opens up high, and you climbing on your work surface to get there because you haven't got the height and the length. It's difficult, and when you're developing, nobody really thinks about that. And I was really, really pleased when I went in to look at the properties that we are developing, where they put the windows to open at a lower level. Not so low that someone could climb in. It's obviously off the first and second floor, but actually that you didn't have to climb onto your countertops to open the window. So little things like that you start to weave in, and the fact that most of us are influencing the policies, most of us are influencing the way we design, means that the people we're working with us with actually do listen to us, because we're the ones that are making the decision. I think that makes quite a big difference for us.
Yeah. So once you start to lift the lid on this, Tracy, you begin to see how sort of broad and deep an issue it is. It cuts across, what you've talked about there, financial independence, society and how we think about women and their role in society, safety. It really does cut across every aspect of someone's life. And I think, I did whoop when you said about the social rent homes, because I think that is a policy which will impact women in the majority, women are more likely to work part-time, or more likely to have unstable incomes, more likely to be doing unpaid caring. And, affordable rent has not been affordable for so many women for so long. So to get to a point where we can actually build more social rent homes and recognise that that's going to be so much more positive for women, it is brilliant. This is such a complex topic though, right? Like there's so much that we could be doing. It's such I suppose not a challenging space to try and navigate our way through with a lot of these policies and services, but it's the first time that maybe organisations are thinking about, well, what would the impact of this be on a woman? It's not a question that I've heard often, asked in a boardroom, if I'm honest. So yeah, like I'm really keen to hear from you on that voice of women's lived experience and how that's informing, your policies, your services, but as well about any barriers that you've experienced and how you maybe overcome those through the work you've been doing.
I think, to start with the barriers first, I think, we are a housing association first, and as a housing association there's so many things that that you just have to get on with and you just have to do, and there are policies and processes that have been there for years and years that we have to follow, and they haven't really been considered from a woman's perspective. Occasionally you see a policy that we all follow, and then you hear that lived experience and you think, well, that's actually wrong. I can understand all the reasons why we do it, whether it's a regulatory thing, whether it's a sort of a financial thing, whether it's just a policy and trying to be fair. And an example I had was I was speaking to an acquaintance of another acquaintance who had been offered a transfer following had actually surviving some abuse, and it was that strapline we say one offer only, which we've all used in the housing world. And her offer was in the right place and it was the right size. So that was her one offer only. But she ended up in small, must have been a house that had been converted into flats, with two single men. And as someone that had suffered abuse, she went in there really happy, but she hadn't herself thought about who else is living here, and certainly her organisation hadn't either. And she, within no time at all, became very terrified of actually going home, because there were two youngish single men, and one in particular would knock on the door and think nothing of it, but she actually found it very intimidating. And she had nobody there that she could call on as a neighbour, because they're both single. And it was just that idea that it's what we do. We just have a policy without thinking of the impact of somebody that is then having to follow that policy, and it bothered me for a little bit. And fortunately we I spoke to her, and she spoke to her housing organisation, and I believe something was sorted out. But it was just that we just failed to think. We really failed to think about the impact. And so that's the challenge, that we are a housing association. We have got things to do. And sometimes we do them because we've got to do it in this time, and there are other things that we've got to follow. So that's the challenge. But there are other things that we've been able to think about. I mean, I think I've talked about the safety aspect. We've got my housing operations director is working with Transport for London on things about safety for women and girls.
Great.
Because we're actually quite close to them in our development in Ealing. And I think people will open doors up for you. I went to an International Women's Day event, and there were lots of architects were talking about, just the environment that they live, and how as women, it was female architects talking, how as women, they try and make sure that when they are designing a space, it is somewhere that they will feel safe and they will feel comfortable. But not many people will think about that. Most will think about the cheapest, the one that's going to get through planning and so on. So you do get a lot of opportunity to speak to other women about their campaigns, about their experience, and all that together builds So you get a wider picture. We get lots of opportunities to speak to our residents, and our residents are great at coming forward and saying things like, I've got a friend that really just needs a safe space to live. There's nothing particular that they need, just that they want that safety aspect. They want to know when they're in their home, they close the doors, and that they feel they know the people around them. We want somewhere where we know that they can come to us with an issue, and we'll really sit and think about it from a woman's perspective. We tend to we obviously work with a lot of contractors, and again, those contractors will recognise what we're doing and will work and behave appropriately. We'll work with recruiters, and those recruiters will often understand what we're trying to do as well. And they will encourage other women to apply for some of our more senior roles or our more technical roles that often you wouldn't find a woman there. And we find that often having the Women's Housing Forum name Women's Pioneer Housing. I'm also
Yes.
co-chair of the Women's Housing Forum, so that's why that one slipped in. Yeah, so I co-chair Women's Housing Forum again, where we really focus on women's needs mainly across housing. But having that Women's Pioneer Housing, I think people can then really focus on, actually, this is an organisation that has been set up and is working to understand women's needs, and they will moderate any behaviour they might have had elsewhere, or they will be really, really interested and want to get to know what we're doing.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting about that, what you've said there around that your women residents and creating spaces for them to sort of feedback and have their voices heard. And I've been involved with Wish for about 9 years now, and I regularly get asked, do we still need a women's only network? Do we still need women's only organisations and spaces? And I haven't found any evidence to suggest that we don't. I haven't found any evidence to suggest that it would be more effective if we didn't and we had these conversations in mixed gender spaces. And I think that's because, women have unique needs and experiences. And if we don't create organisations, spaces, mechanisms for them to have their voices heard, then how are we then able to get the insight and the data and the evidence we need to then develop homes, services, organisations that have them in mind? And I've been quite struck through the campaign when I've been lifting the lid on some of this and been doing some freedom of information requests and a bit of data hunting to just find out, what is the experience of women in the sector? Because I don't really know, apart from some surveys that we do here at Wish. I'm really keen to just understand how are women experiencing the sector as tenants. And it's been quite shocking, some of the data that I've found. And I think it's just sort of cemented in my mind that actually taking a gender lensed approach, really leaning into the fact that women have different needs and experiences and we need to create spaces to specifically hear them, is absolutely the right thing to do. Yeah, so it's really interesting to hear your experience of that.
I love what the phrase you just used about leaning in to make sure that we are hearing and giving a space to women. So certainly from my perspective as a leader in a sector which has got pretty high number of women in it, we routinely will celebrate, as you can expect, International Women's Day. And we've spoken quite candidly in the organisation about sort of reproductive health and the impact it has on our work, that we shouldn't be penalised or thought less of, menstrual cycles, our pregnancies, our menopause. And we really don't open that door in organisations and look at the massive impact it has on us, right from the minute we start working at 18, till sort of retirement age and beyond. The impact is throughout our working lives. And when we start having those conversations in our team, and actually even a couple of the officers speak about some of our residents having that conversations with them as well about, their homes and the impact of living in some of our homes when you're going through things like the menopause and so on. When we have that conversation, we start to realise how our lives are impacted by the menopause, our menstrual cycles, our pregnancies, and that work hasn't shifted to, I wouldn't say accommodate it, but to recognise it. It
Yeah.
really hasn't. We're still working in sort of organisations that would not consider that. And yes, you might have some things in the loo and so on. But, these times in our lives can be really impactful for a lot of us, can really, really punctuate your working day or,
Yes.
weeks and months of your life if you're affected by, hot flushes, for example, and, very difficult periods. And there's no opportunity to have that conversation. Where do we have that conversation as women in our organisations? Where are we recognised about what we might have to fight through a little bit more to hold down our jobs and be really professional? That I think is quite sad. So when you're saying about leaning in and having those spaces, and that we're quite heavily dominated, I think, in most organisations. Most will be at least 50% women. Most housing organisations would say
Mm-hmm.
50% women, but there's no aspect of that. There's no
Yeah.
recognition of that. There's a lack of understanding of that. And if you think that we're not understanding how we work, then how well are we understanding how our residents, our female residents, live?
Yes.
So it's worrying on that case, isn't it? I think we should open the door more to think about how our policies, how our designs, how our developments are lived in as women, but how our organisations understand women's health and works to make sure that there is equality in the way we lead or we are as an organisation in recognition of women's health. Yeah, challenges and sort of more to do, a lot more to do, I think. I think you're absolutely right. It's not something that we think about often enough, and we really ought to. There should be
Yeah.
more stats on it, more information on it. Going into an interview, if you manage to have a hot flushing before, how
Yes.
prepared are you then? If you've got the brain fog and all the things that go with the menopause, how difficult is it? And how do
Yeah.
we create that balance to enable women to do well in our organisations and in our homes?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what I recognise sometimes is an inertia towards action because of the fear of getting it wrong, or the fear that, it will, if we do this thing over here, then it'll have this domino effect. And, so we're just not going to do anything. And yeah, I think, so there's a lady that I work with. She's a good friend, actually. She said to me the other week, Crystal, I've just worked it out. I only have one good week a month. The rest of the month, I'm on my period, or I've just finished my period and I've got that real post-period sadness, or then I'm building up to ovulation. I'm full of energy and could take on the world. And then I go into that premenstrual phase and I'm no good to anyone. So I've got one good week a month. And I said, it's so funny because I work really closely with her, and I'm like, sometimes you are just on it. Yeah. And then other times I can tell you're just low energy, but you're still delivering, but you're just low energy. So what would it take for your work pattern to look good around that? And the one thing she said was just flexibility, just that flexibility to know that it's all right to not be on it all of the time and delivering 150% all the time. You'll get 1 week a month where I absolutely am. So the rest of it, just that flexibility to maybe at lunchtime I have a nap. If I'm at home, just reset, have some lunch, and then come back. So I think, and then I said to her, well, what stopped you from really pushing for that flexibility at work? And she said, she doesn't work for my organisation, by the way. It's just that fear that if they do it for me, then they would maybe have to do it for everybody, and then that becomes unsustainable as an organisation. And I think this is maybe sometimes where we as leaders, we maybe don't push through some of the things, or trying some of the things that we know might work, because of that fear of, well, you do it for one, you've got to do it for everybody. Yeah, I don't know, sort of in your sort of leadership space, if you've ever had to grapple with that issue.
I mean, it's not something I brought in. We've always had it here, but we do have very, very flexible working. So it's great that it's now enshrined in our laws that you have to consider flexible working, where we have flexi time off 2 days a month, so it can work out quite well. I've worked somewhere where actually you could do flexi time by hours. If you just needed to stay in bed that little bit later, or stop at a certain time, or have, as you said, that long lunch to just, sort of settle yourself and go and get things and so on. So I think in the leadership, there's a couple of things. First of all, in the International Women's Day, it's that conversation, and I've done it obviously in this organisation. I've done it in other organisations where it's really opening up and saying we need to speak about what work really means to us, what works well and what doesn't. We do an annual, as others will do, an annual sort of survey, engagement survey, but we'll focus on health and well-being as opposed to just focus on how well have we trained you.
Yes.
And I think that's important. So, when we are talking in what catch-ups and one-to-ones, there's a real view of how is your well-being, what is happening, not just in your personal life, but for your health. How is your health and well-being, and what can we do to help you? And I think you're right. There is sometimes a worry that if you do it for one person, it may be you've got to do it across the piece. But we had COVID and we got through it. And I sort of think that alone should say to us, everything is really possible and you can still deliver really well if you think about that individual. But I think it's more important that organisations understand what it means during that one week of the month where you are firing on all cylinders, and the other 3 or 4 where you're not.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be understood a little bit more, and I think organisations need to talk about this a bit more and really understand the impact.
Yeah, that seeking to understand is a common theme that keeps coming up when I'm having conversations with people. And I think also that thing of, actually, this isn't just good for women, some of these things, it's good for everybody. So it's not doing for one group, therefore disadvantages another. Actually doing a lot of these things is just great for everybody. Yeah, I'm loving our conversation, Tracy, but we're running out of time, and I really want to get to the question that we ask everybody on our podcast, which is, if you had one wish for the sector, what would it be and why?
My wish is going to be around women, because that's who I work for, and it's around our developments and regeneration. As we're building taller buildings, inducing great landscapes, I would really disheartened, surprised, disappointed to see that when we go to planning, we'll talk to different communities about, sort of the landscapes and their businesses and what they want to see, but we don't talk to a community of women and girls about safety. The planning process doesn't do that at all, and I don't think because the planning process doesn't, or housing associations don't, or housing doesn't have to either. So my one wish is, when we are developing, and I love the fact that we are so absolutely fantastic, that we adopt more of a gender focused lens for safety for women, that we're not building landscapes of tall bushes, that if we are increasing the time it takes to get from someone's school to their home because we've now got this building in between, think about what that feels and looks like for them, and that we work with things like the local transport and local schools and colleges to make sure that the buildings we're creating doesn't disrupt the area and cause people to feel unsafe.
Yeah.
So that would be my wish, really, to really think about women's safety, women and girls' safety when we are building, and actually include it in the planning process.
Wouldn't that be brilliant to see that factored in as a criteria to that planning consultation and the development process? And, as we've talked about on the podcast, it would then make our communities safer for everybody, not just for women and girls, but, for more older people in our communities, even our just young people in general. Yeah, so this isn't just to help one group. This is these things would benefit everybody. So absolutely. Oh, Tracy, it's been lush chatting with you. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Yes, so you've been listening to the If I Had One Wish podcast. Please do follow us on social media to find out more about the campaign and everything that's going on within Wish. Catch up on our other podcasts as well. We've got multiple series now that have landed wherever you get your podcasts. So do have a little listen there, and we hope to come to you again soon. Thank you everyone for listening to the If I Had One Wish podcast. Next time, we'll be talking to another inspirational female from the housing sector who will be sharing her career story and what she's learned along the way. And of course, we'll be asking again the big question. If she had one wish, what would it be and why? See you next time.